3 days earlier, the Shadowpelt pack had been nothing more than a whisper on the wind, a clan relegated to the barren, mist-shrouded mountains. The kind of place where Omega bloodlines and cast-offs scrape together an existence, far from the vibrant, powerful heart of the shifter territories. Sera had grown up knowing exactly what she was. The daughter of a forgotten lineage, bearer of a bloodline so diluted that her wolf form was a pale, ethereal silver instead of the rich, dark coats that marked true alphakin. At 22 she'd never displayed any special gifts, had never been considered a prize, and had certainly never expected to catch the attention of anyone important. Which made the arrival of the Ironclaw war party all the more terrifying. "They're here for the great conclave," her adoptive mother Lyra had whispered as they watched the procession of massive, battle-scarred wolves descend into their valley. "The High Alpha himself is presiding over the annual bond revelations." Sera had watched from behind the flap of her tent as wolves in black leather and fur, each one a giant of muscle and power, made their camp. At the center of it all, radiating an aura of brutal, untamed dominance, was Alpha Rhys Ironclaw. Even from 100 paces, Sera felt something primal ignite in her core. A searing heat that had nothing to do with the summer air and everything to do with the impossible recognition that clawed through her very soul. "Mine," a voice that was both her and not her growled in her mind. She'd almost laughed at the sheer tragic absurdity of it. Seraphina Nightbreeze, the silver ghost, bonded to the most powerful, most feared alpha in the territories. The first wolf had a truly vicious sense of humor. But when Rhys's head had snapped in her direction, when those storm-gray eyes had locked onto hers with a predatory intensity that made her knees buckle, she'd known the bond was real. And from the way his expression had instantly twisted from recognition to sheer revulsion, she'd also known exactly what he thought about it. "A flaw," she'd heard him snarl to his beta as they were formally introduced that evening. "The bloodline has a flaw." Sera had spent the next 2 days enduring Rhys's cold fury, seeing the barely concealed contempt in his eyes. Every time he was forced to be near her, she watched him turn his attention to the high-born she-wolves from other packs, touching their arms, laughing at their jokes, all while his body radiated a possessive heat meant only for her. She'd also seen the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The raw, possessive hunger in his gaze when the feral bond flared between them. The way his claws would extend and retract, shredding the leather of his gloves, when another male so much as glanced her way. The bond was real. The desire was a savage, undeniable thing. But his pride was stronger. Which brought them to tonight. The formal severance rite, where all feral bonds revealed during the conclave would be officially accepted or brutally broken. Sera had known what was coming. She'd felt it in the icy wall he'd erected between them, in the way he refused to even look at her. She'd come to the great hall prepared to be broken. To bow her head, accept his rejection and fade away. But as she'd stood there watching him declare her unworthy in front of the shifter elite, watching the cruel smirks on the faces of the she-wolves who'd always known she was nothing, something inside her had shattered. Not her heart, that had been slowly turning to ash for days. Her submission. For the first time in her life, Seraphina Nightbreeze had stopped caring about her place in the pack. And apparently when you stopped caring about the rules, you discovered you had claws sharp enough to tear them all down. Chapter 2. The Ancient Claws. The silence that followed Sera's counter-rejection was absolute. A void so profound it felt like the world had stopped turning. The High Alpha Kalan, ancient and powerful, sat frozen on his throne of ironwood and stone, his eyes wide with an expression that was equal parts shock and predatory delight. The assembled alphas looked between Sera and Rhys as if watching a deer suddenly turn and charge a wolf. Rhys's face was a mask of granite, a dangerous calm that promised nothing but violence. "You," he growled, the single word a threat. "You cannot reject me. That is not the law." Sera felt a wild, reckless power surge through her veins. Maybe it was the feral bond finally snapping. Or maybe it was 22 years of being treated as less finally reaching its breaking point. Either way, she found herself smiling, a sharp baring of teeth that was all wolf. "Actually," she said, her gaze sweeping to the ancient pact stones that stood beside the High Alpha's throne. "According to the first pact of the wolf, any feral bond, once acknowledged, can be severed by either party. The fact that most rejected she-wolves are too broken to speak the words doesn't mean they can't." A wave of guttural murmurs swept through the hall. Sarah could see the pack elders frantically consulting their lore keepers, their expressions shifting from disbelief to astonishment. She is right, stammered the High Alpha's chief elder, a withered wolf named Marcus. The clause of reciprocal rejection exists. It has just never been invoked because no one has ever been foolish enough to try. Foolish enough to defy an alpha of my standing, Rhys finished, his voice a deadly whisper. But the energy in the room had shifted. What had begun as a public shaming was now a legal and spiritual challenge that even the High Alpha could not ignore. Remarkable, High Alpha Kalen said, leaning forward. His voice, heavy with the weight of centuries, boomed through the hall. In my 200 years as High Alpha, I have never witnessed a reciprocal rejection. Tell me, little silver wolf, do you understand what you have just unleashed? Sarah's newfound courage threatened to falter under his piercing gaze, but she held her ground. I have rejected the Alpha who rejected me, High Alpha. Nothing more. Nothing less. Nothing more. Rhys took a step closer, the air around him crackling with raw, furious power. You have spat on tradition. Alphas are not rejected by Omegas, Sarah finished for him. You're right. Alphas are not rejected because most wolves are too terrified to claim their own God-given rights. But I am not most wolves. The lie felt like truth on her tongue. The reality was she was trembling, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. But she was also furious, more furious than she had ever been. And fury, she was discovering, was a far more potent weapon than fear. This is unprecedented, High Alpha Kalen mused, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He was thoroughly enjoying the chaos. Marcus, what does the pact say about the consequences of a reciprocal rejection? The elder cleared his throat. According to the ancient texts, High Alpha, when both parties sever the feral bond, it creates a dominance forfeit. Both wolves are free to seek other mates, but a price must be paid. A price. Sarah and Rhys spoke at the same time. Oh yes, the High Alpha grinned, showing the tips of his canines. The dominance forfeit requires a tribute to be paid by the one who initiated the rejection. Since Alpha Rhys spoke the first rejection, he let the words hang in the air, thick with implication. The color drained from Rhys's face. High Alpha, you cannot be serious. The Ironclaw Dominion's lands, its armies. Yes. The High Alpha's smile widened. Which is what makes this so entertaining. Tell me, little wolf, are you familiar with the tribute for a dominance forfeit? Sarah's mouth was bone dry. She'd been running on pure, incandescent rage, but she hadn't thought past the moment of throwing his rejection back in his face. No, High Alpha. I am not. The rejected party is entitled to claim Alpha's right, Marcus read from a scroll, his voice gaining confidence. Meaning, if an Alpha rejects a mate and that mate reciprocally rejects, the rejected party gains the right to claim half of all that the Alpha would have shared through the bond. Half his lands, half his wealth, and the Alpha status to rule it. The great hall exploded into a cacophony of snarled whispers. Sarah felt her legs threaten to give out as the full weight of the law hit her. You mean, she whispered. I mean, High Alpha Kalen boomed, his ancient eyes twinkling with pure, unadulterated mischief, that you, Seraphina Nightbreeze, have just legally claimed the right to your own Alpha Dominion, carved directly from the heart of the Ironclaw lands. Congratulations, my dear. You have just gone from rejected Omega to Alpha in the span of a single breath. The look of absolute murderous fury on Rhys Ironclaw's face was almost worth the terror currently flooding her system. Almost. Chapter 3. The Betrayal. The triumphant fire in Sarah's veins lasted for exactly 12 heartbeats. That's how long it took for Rhys Ironclaw to recover from his shock and remember that he was an Alpha who had never been beaten, never been defied, and never ever lost. His fury, which had been a raging inferno, suddenly cooled into something far more dangerous. Calculated ice. High Alpha, Rhys said, his voice a low, silky growl that promised retribution. While I appreciate this fascinating lesson in ancient law, I believe we are overlooking a critical detail. High Alpha Kalen raised a silver eyebrow, his amusement still plain. Oh. The clause of reciprocal rejection, Rhys continued, his sharp smile never reaching his cold eyes, requires that both parties be of official pact standing when the feral bond is acknowledged and severed. Miss Nightbreeze may have been born of the Shadowpelt pack, but she is no longer a member. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? I'm talking about this, Rhys said, pulling a rolled, sealed parchment from his leather tunic with a theatrical flourish. 3 hours ago your pack's alpha, Lyra Nightbreeze, formally filed for your exile. The charge: conduct unbecoming of a pack member, endangering the stability of your clan. He unfurled the parchment. Even from across the hall, Sarah could see the distinctive trembling signature of Lyra, her adoptive mother, the woman who had raised her. The woman who had promised to protect her. The exile was filed and sealed with the Elder Council this afternoon, Rhys went on, his voice booming with renewed dominance as he sensed victory. Which means that when you attempted to reject me you were no longer a pack wolf. You were a rogue. And rogues have no legal standing. They cannot invoke the first pact. They cannot claim Alpha's right. The great hall spun around Sarah as the full, devastating scope of the trap became clear. This wasn't a spontaneous humiliation. This had been meticulously planned. Lyra, the she-wolf who had called her daughter for 17 years, had sold her out to the very Alpha who sought to destroy her. Lyra, Sarah whispered, her voice cracking over the renewed, mocking murmurs of the crowd. She scanned the assembled wolves until she found her. Lyra stood near the back of the hall, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't deny it. She didn't rush forward to defend Sarah or claim the document was a forgery. She just stood there, her silent, weeping form a testament to her betrayal. Those tears felt like claws tearing into Sarah's already wounded heart. The document is properly witnessed and sealed, Marcus the Elder confirmed after examining the parchment, his voice heavy with a pity that only made Sarah's shame burn hotter. Filed at sundown today. Her status was rogue before the rite began. Which means, Rhys declared, his voice a triumphant roar, that Miss Nightbreeze's little outburst holds no legal weight. She spoke as a rogue and rogues have no rights. The original rejection stands. There is no dominance forfeit. No tribute is required. High Alpha Kalen studied the parchment for a long moment, his expression now unreadable. Sarah held her breath, praying that the ancient wolf might find some loophole, some flaw in the cruel logic that was destroying her. Instead he nodded slowly. The law is clear. Without pack standing there can be no reciprocal rejection. His gaze found Sarah across the hall, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something other than amusement in his eyes. I'm sorry, child. You played your hand well, but the game was rigged against you before it began. The defeat was crushing, but it was the betrayal that shattered her soul. Sarah looked again at Lyra, the woman who had found her as an orphaned pup and promised her a home. The woman who had taught her to track, who had soothed her fevers, who had held her through nightmares and told her she was worthy of love, silver coat and all. The woman who had just thrown her to the wolves, literally, for a chance to gain favor with Alpha Rhys. Why? Sarah asked, the single word a raw, broken thing. Lyra finally spoke, her voice a miserable whisper that still carried in the silent hall. He promised to protect the pack, she cried. If I helped him avoid the political shame of rejecting his mate, he would grant our territory his protection. Our people would be safe from the border skirmishes. Our people, Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. But not me. You were never truly one of us, Lyra sobbed, and each word was a fresh wound. Your bloodline, your silver fur. We all knew you were different. This way at least your sacrifice means something. At least the pack survives. The cruel, simple math of it was breathtaking. Trade one worthless, silver-pelted wolf for the security of dozens. From a purely practical standpoint it was a smart move. From a personal standpoint, it was the kind of betrayal that broke the spirit. Sarah felt something inside her chest crack and crumble into dust. Not her heart, which had already been savaged by Rhys's initial rejection, but something deeper. The part of her that had always believed that if she just tried hard enough, was good enough, quiet enough, she might eventually earn her place. That part died right there on the cold stone floor of the great hall, in front of hundreds of witnesses who were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Well then, she said, her voice surprisingly steady for someone whose entire world had just collapsed. I suppose that settles it. She turned to face Rhys, who watched her with an expression that might have been satisfaction, or might have been a flicker of regret. It was hard to tell, and Sarah found she no longer cared. Congratulations, Alpha, she said with a small mocking bow. You won. I hope the victory feels as grand as you imagined. She started toward the massive doors of the great hall, intending to walk out with whatever shred of dignity she had left. She would find a cliff somewhere and contemplate whether the fall would be more or less painful than living with this level of humiliation. But the High Alpha's voice stopped her before she'd taken 3 steps. "Miss Nightbreeze," the ancient wolf called, his voice carrying a strange new note of anticipation. "Before you go, there is something else you should know." Sarah turned back, too emotionally drained to feel either hope or fear. The High Alpha smiled, and this time, there was something truly predatory in the expression. "You may not be able to invoke the clause of reciprocal rejection as a rogue," he said. "But there is one other legal avenue available to you." "High Alpha," Marcus the Elder looked confused. "The right of challenge," Kaelin said simply. "Any wolf who has been wronged by an alpha may invoke the ancient right to challenge them for dominance. Win and you gain everything they would have lost in the dominance forfeit. Lose." He shrugged, a massive, eloquent gesture. "Lose and you die," Rhys finished, his voice tight with something that might have been annoyance at this new complication. "Precisely." The High Alpha's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Miss Nightbreeze, are you familiar with the right of challenge?" Sarah's mouth was too dry to speak, so she just shook her head. "It's quite simple really," Kaelin continued conversationally. "Single combat, shifted form. No weapons, no assistance, no mercy. The challenged party chooses the time and manner of combat, but it must take place within 7 days of the challenge being issued. Winner takes all." He leaned forward in his throne, and for the first time all evening he looked genuinely invested in the outcome. "The question is, do you have the courage to issue such a challenge? Or will you walk away and live with the knowledge that you let them destroy you without a fight?" The great hall held its breath. Even Lyra had stopped crying, watching Sarah with wide, horrified eyes. Rhys, for his part, looked like a man watching a rabbit decide whether to attack a dire wolf. Confident in the outcome but surprised by the sheer, suicidal audacity. Sarah looked around the room at all the powerful, smirking faces. Noble wolves who had never known hunger or true rejection. Alphas who had been born into dominance. Elders who served kings and never had to wonder if they'd have a home tomorrow. None of them understood what it was like to have absolutely nothing left to lose. But Sarah was about to show them. Chapter 4. Exile begins. I, Seraphina Nightbreeze, invoke the right of challenge against Alpha Rhys Ironclaw. The words tore from her throat before her rational mind could stop them. They hung in the charged air like a death sentence, which realistically they almost certainly were. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Half the hall gasped in shock, while the other half erupted in excited, bloodthirsty whispers. Someone in the back actually let out a howl of delighted disbelief. Rhys stared at her as if she had just sprouted wings and breathed fire. "You cannot be serious." "Deadly serious," Sarah replied, surprised by how calm she sounded. Inside, her wolf was pacing frantically, whining about the sheer insanity of challenging an alpha who could likely snap her neck with one hand. But the human part of her, the part that was bone-weary of being small and scared and forgettable, felt an odd, liberating peace. "This is madness," Lyra whispered from her spot near the back wall, taking a hesitant step forward. "Sarah, please just walk away. You've made your point." "Have I?" Sarah turned to face her former mother, her former pack, her former everything. "What point would that be, Lyra? That I'm exactly as weak and worthless as everyone always believed? That you were right to trade me away like a pelt at market? Is that the point I've made?" "That's not what I—" "That is exactly what you meant." Sarah's voice carried a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You meant that I was expendable. That my life, my happiness, my future, none of it mattered as much as your political convenience." She turned her burning gaze back to High Alpha Kaelin, who was watching the exchange with the delighted expression of someone at a grand feast. "High Alpha, I formally request that you witness my challenge." "Witnessed and accepted," the ancient wolf replied immediately, clearly having the time of his long life. "Alpha Ironclaw, you are legally bound by the first pact to respond. Will you accept the challenge?" Rhys looked around the hall, a muscle twitching in his jaw, as if hoping someone would explain how his perfectly executed evening had descended into this chaotic mess. His beta, a broad-shouldered wolf named Gideon, was making frantic, subtle gestures to stand down from the sidelines. "She's a rogue with no formal combat training," Rhys finally said, his voice laced with contempt. She's barely larger than an Omega. This isn't a challenge. It's a publicly sanctioned execution. Nevertheless, High Alpha Kalen said cheerfully, the law is the law. You must either accept her challenge, or you must formally acknowledge her as your superior and grant her the dominance forfeit she originally claimed. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could practically see the calculations warring in Rhys's mind as he weighed his options. Accept the challenge and risk looking like a brutal tyrant who slaughtered a helpless she-wolf for sport, or back down and lose face, power, and standing in front of the entire shifter hierarchy. For an alpha like Rhys, whose entire identity was built on dominance, the choice was no choice at all. Fine, he snarled eventually, his voice tight with controlled fury. I accept. But I choose the terms. Of course you do, Sarah muttered under her breath. 7 days from tonight. At the zenith of the full moon in the arena of ancestors. Shifted combat, no weapons, fight to submission or... He paused, his storm-gray eyes boring into her, giving her one last chance to back down, or death. Agreed, the word came out steadier than Sarah felt. Then it is settled. High Alpha Kalen announced, clapping his massive hands together with evident satisfaction. Let the record show that the rogue Seraphina Nightbreeze has invoked the right of challenge against Alpha Rhys Ironclaw, with combat to take place in 7 days' time. Until then, both parties are under royal protection and may not be harmed or interfered with by any other party. He stood from his throne, a clear signal that the evening's entertainment had concluded. Court is dismissed. I do so look forward to next week's festivities. As the assembled wolves began to file out of the great hall, chattering excitedly about the unprecedented drama, Sarah found herself standing alone in the center of the cold stone floor. Alone and beginning to realize the full, terrifying scope of what she had just done. 7 days to prepare for a fight against one of the most powerful alphas in living memory. 7 days to somehow become strong enough to survive combat with a wolf who had been bred and trained for battle since he was a pup. 7 days to figure out how to avoid being torn apart in front of hundreds of spectators. 7 days to live, little wolf. The voice was quiet, belonging to a grizzled royal guard captain who approached her. His face was a roadmap of old scars, but his eyes held a surprising amount of sympathy. His Majesty has arranged quarters for you in the Exile's Tower. Is there anything you require? Sarah almost laughed. Require? She required a miracle. She required a new body, a new past, a new fate. She looked at the guard, at the pity in his eyes, and a spark of her earlier fire returned. She was going to die, she would die fighting, not cowering. Actually, she said, surprising herself, there is. I need every scroll, every record, every piece of lore you have on Alpha Rhys Ironclaw's fighting style. His weaknesses, his preferred tactics, every victory and every loss. I want anything that might give me even the smallest chance. The guard captain, whose name tag read Commander Hayes, raised a scarred eyebrow. Planning to fight dirty, are you? Planning to survive, Sarah corrected, her voice hard as flint. And if that requires fighting dirty, then I'll become the dirtiest fighter this kingdom has ever seen. The commander's weathered face split into the first genuine smile she'd seen all night. Now that, he said, a note of respect in his voice, sounds like the attitude of a wolf who might actually make this interesting. Chapter 5. The Opportunity. The Exile's Tower was exactly as bleak as it sounded. Carved into the eastern cliff face of the High Alpha's mountain fortress, it was traditionally used to house noble-born wolves who had committed crimes too serious to ignore but whose bloodlines were too valuable to simply execute. The circular stone room had one narrow window overlooking a sheer drop, one cot of packed furs, one small table, and the kind of oppressive silence that made you acutely aware of your own impending mortality. Sarah had been staring at the stone ceiling for 3 hours, the adrenaline of the great hall having long since faded into a hollow dread, when the knock came. Enter, she called, assuming it was a servant with her meager meal or another stack of combat scrolls from Commander Hayes that would do little good against an alpha who could likely shatter boulders with his bare hands. Instead, the commander himself stepped into the room, followed by a figure that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The she-wolf was ancient, not in the tired, frail way of pack elders, but in the timeless, dangerous way of a predator who had survived centuries through cunning and power. Her hair was a cascade of pure white, braided with small, polished bones and dark moonstones, and her eyes held the kind of deep, unsettling knowledge that came from watching empires rise and fall. "Miss Nightbreeze," Commander Hayes said with formal respect. "May I present Oracle Vera, keeper of the first pact and advisor to 3 generations of high alphas." Sarah scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding. She was in the presence of a living legend. Oracle Vera was a myth, the last of the ancient shamans who remembered the old magic from before the Great Wars, a time when shifters had power beyond just tooth and claw. "Oracle," Sarah stammered, bowing her head. "I apologize for my state. I don't know the proper." "Child," Oracle Vera interrupted, her voice a low melodic hum that seemed to vibrate in Sarah's very bones. "In 4 days, you are going to die a brutal and public death unless something changes dramatically. We do not have time for etiquette." She moved into the room with a fluid grace, settling into the single chair as if it were a throne. Commander Hayes respectfully retreated to the doorway to stand guard. "I have come to make you an offer," the Oracle continued, her ageless eyes fixed on Sarah. "One that could save your life if you are brave enough to accept it." Sarah's heart began to race. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that your ancestors would have understood." Oracle Vera's eyes glittered in the torchlight. "Tell me, child, what do you know about your bloodline? Your real bloodline? Not the watered-down tale of forgotten omegas your pack told you." Sarah sank back down onto the cot. "I don't know anything about my real bloodline. Lyra found me in the woods as a pup. I don't remember anything before then." "Of course you don't. The memory seal was part of the binding spell." The Oracle leaned forward, studying Sarah's face with an uncomfortable intensity. "But bindings weaken over time, especially under extreme emotional stress like having your feral bond severed. Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual in the past few days? Dreams of a great white wolf? Flashes of power you can't explain?" Sarah's mouth went dry. The strange surge of power in the great hall, the way her voice had carried. "How did you?" "Because I cast the original binding 20 years ago," Oracle Vera said, her expression softening slightly. "At the request of a dying she-wolf who wanted to protect her only granddaughter from enemies who would kill her for her heritage." Her ancient eyes held Sarah's. "Your real name is not Seraphina Nightbreeze, child. It is Seraphina Moon-Touched, the last surviving heir of the lunar bloodline." The room spun. Memories she dismissed as strange dreams suddenly snapped into focus. A woman with hair like spun moonlight singing lullabies in an ancient tongue. A massive silver wolf teaching her to call down the power of the moon. A burning forest, screams, and someone shoving her into a hollow log while whispering about protection spells and hidden bloodlines. "The lunar bloodline," she whispered. "But that's extinct. Everyone knows the Moon-Touched were wiped out during the Rogue Wars." "Everyone knows what the Alphas wanted them to know," Vera corrected. "Your grandmother, Lyra Moon-Touched, was the most powerful Alpha Queen in shifter history. She could command the tides, could shift into forms that legends are made of, could work magic that made the earth itself tremble. She was also smart enough to know that such power makes you a target. So she hid me. She died protecting you," the Oracle said quietly, "along with the rest of your kin, when the Council of Alphas decided the lunar bloodline had become too powerful to be allowed to exist. You were a pup, the sole survivor, hidden away with binding spells that would suppress your abilities until you were old enough to claim them safely." Sarah felt like she was drowning in the impossible truth. "You're saying I'm some kind of secret shifter princess?" "I'm saying you are the genetic descendant of the most powerful supernatural bloodline in recorded history, and that your abilities have been artificially suppressed for 2 decades. Vera stood, moving to the window to stare out at the moonlit sky. "I am also saying that those bindings are starting to crack. And in 4 days, you are going to need every ounce of power you can get." "But if I'm so powerful, why am I still just me?" "Because power without training is just dangerous potential." The Oracle turned back to face her. "Which brings me to my offer. I can break the binding spells tonight. I can give you access to your full heritage, your complete abilities, everything your bloodline should have granted you from birth." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "What's the catch?" Oracle Vera smiled, a flash of teeth too sharp to be entirely human. "Smart girl. The catch is that 2 decades of suppressed power released all at once will either kill you or transform you into something beyond current shifter understanding. There is no middle ground. You either survive the transition and become what you were born to be, or your body and soul are torn apart in the process. And if I don't take the offer? Then you face Alpha Rhys with the strength of a silver-pelted Omega, and you will die approximately 30 seconds after the combat begins. The choice, when laid out so starkly, didn't feel like much of a choice at all. Chapter 6. First Trial. The 4 days that followed were a strange, tormenting limbo. Sera spent her days in the fortress's training yard with Commander Hayes and his best fighters. They taught her basic combat maneuvers, how to parry a lunge, how to find an opening in an opponent's defense. The lessons felt laughably inadequate. It was like teaching a rabbit how to box in preparation for fighting a grizzly bear. Every evening she would return to her cold tower room, exhausted and bruised, to pore over the ancient scrolls Vera had provided, texts filled with forgotten lore and shifter history that felt more like fables than practical knowledge. And during the long, sleepless nights she wrestled with the Oracle's offer. It sat in her soul like a ticking bomb, a choice between two kinds of death, one swift and certain in the arena, the other a terrifying, unknown agony in the pursuit of power. She was no closer to a decision than she had been the first night. On the third night she had an unexpected visitor. The knock on her door was soft, almost hesitant. When Sera opened it, she found herself face to face with a she-wolf of breathtaking beauty, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes like polished jade. She radiated an aura of old-world nobility and immense power. This was Arya, daughter of the Sunstone Alpha, a she-wolf who, by all accounts, should have been Rhys's chosen mate. "Miss Nightbreeze," Arya said, her voice smooth but strained. "My name is Arya Sunstone. I was the one Rhys was courting before your bond was revealed." Sera blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No, I'm not. You're better off without him." Arya's laugh was a bitter, broken sound. "That's what I came to tell you. You're not the first true mate he's cast aside." She stepped into the room, her nervous energy filling the small space. "May I sit? This is complicated." Sera gestured to the chair, settling on the cot herself. "Complicated how?" "Rhys is not just proud," Arya began, her hands twisting in her lap. "He's terrified. Terrified of the feral bond itself. 3 years ago, during a territory negotiation in the south, he found his first true mate. A beautiful beta from the Riverfang pack named Celeste. The bond, I'm told, was immediate, powerful, undeniable." Sera felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "What happened to her?" "The same thing that almost happened to you, except she didn't have your fire." Arya's voice was flat with suppressed anger. "He rejected her publicly. Claimed her bloodline was too weak to stand beside his. She accepted it quietly like a good little wolf and vanished into the rogue lands, utterly broken." Sera's heart ached for the unknown she-wolf. "And then he found me," she whispered. "And then he found you." Arya met Sera's eyes. "Do you want to know the real reason he rejected you so viciously? It wasn't because your bloodline was weak. It was because your bond was stronger. Stronger than anything he had ever felt, stronger even than his bond with Celeste. The raw, primal power of it terrified him." Her eyes softened with a strange pity. "An alpha like Rhys has spent his entire life mastering control. Over his pack, over his emotions, over himself. The feral bond is the one thing he can't control. It's a surrender. And he would rather burn the world to the ground than surrender to anyone." The room fell silent as Sera processed this. The rejection suddenly felt different. It was still cruel, but it was the cruelty of a cornered, terrified animal. "He's afraid of needing someone," she said slowly. "He's afraid of losing himself to the pleasure and the pain of it," Arya corrected. "Why do you think he was touching all those other she-wolves at the conclave? He was trying to prove to himself and to you that the bond meant nothing. But I saw his eyes. Every time he looked at you, it was like he was starving." "Why are you telling me this?" Sera asked, her voice raspy. "Because there's more," Arya said, her expression grim. "He isn't planning to fight you fairly. He's been meeting with a blood shaman named Victor Shadowcaster. Victor specializes in rage tonics, alchemical enhancers that triple an alpha's strength and aggression." Sera's blood ran cold. "So, he gets to be a chemically enhanced monster and I get to be naturally dead. Unless you find your own advantage." Arya reached into her tunic and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. "This belonged to Celeste. She left it behind when she went into exile. But I thought you might find it useful. Sarah took the journal, the worn leather cool against her skin. What's in it? Everything she learned about Rhys during their time together, Arya said, a grim smile touching her lips. His fighting style. The way he favors his left side after an old injury. The tells in his eyes right before he strikes. His fears. She leaned closer. His deepest, most secret vulnerabilities. It turns out a broken heart makes for a very thorough intelligence gatherer. Arya moved to the door, then paused one last time. Sarah, whatever you're planning for the challenge, be careful. The political implications of you actually winning are staggering. There are wolves in that great hall who would rather see you dead than see the balance of power shift. Are you one of them? Sarah asked quietly. Arya's smile was as sharp as a shard of obsidian. Darling, I've spent my entire life being told my only value was as a broodmare for a powerful alpha. If you can tear that system down and build something better, you have my undying support. After she left, Sarah sat on her cot, Celeste's journal a heavy weight in her hands. She was afraid to open it. It was easier to hate Rhys when he was just a monster. Understanding him felt dangerous. But easier wasn't going to keep her alive. With a deep breath, she opened the journal. The first line, written in a delicate, looping script, made her breath catch. Day 1. I met my soul today. His name is Rhys Ironclaw. The bond is a fire that threatens to consume me whole. But I saw something in his eyes when he looked at me. Fear. Why would an alpha be afraid of his own soul? Chapter 7. Second Trial. Midnight came, and with it the sound of silent footsteps. Sarah had been awake for hours, Celeste's journal lying open beside her. She had read it cover to cover, her heart aching for the gentle beta who had loved Rhys so completely. The journal painted a portrait not of a monster, but of a man so terrified of the vulnerability that came with true connection that he would rather destroy happiness than risk being truly known. Oracle Vera entered the cell, a silent shadow moving with the fluid grace of centuries. The moon is high, child. The time for decision is upon us. Sarah took a deep breath, the scent of pine and cold stone filling her lungs. I have questions first. As is your right. Ask them quickly. The moon's power peaks in less than an hour, and we will need every moment if you choose this path. If I survive this awakening, Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly, what will I become? You said I'd be like my grandmother. What does that truly mean? Vera settled into the chair, her ancient eyes reflecting the moonlight. Lyra Moontouch did not just command packs, she commanded the very spirit of wolfkind. Her presence was an intoxicating call to the feral soul. Alphas would bow, omegas would feel a strength they never knew they possessed. Her power was not of brute force, but of undeniable primal magnetism. The oracle leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The feral bond you share with Rhys is already powerful. It's a fire he is desperately trying to smother. If you awaken your true nature, that fire will become a supernova. He won't just desire you, he will be consumed by you. The bond will become an agonizing, undeniable obsession. He will be utterly undone by the very power he tried to cast away. The image was intoxicatingly potent. Rhys, the great alpha, brought to his knees not by violence, but by a need so powerful it would shatter his pride. But there's something else, Sarah said quietly, looking out the narrow window at the moonlit courtyard where the arena was being prepared. I've been having dreams since you told me. Not just the memories. New dreams. I'm in that arena and I'm stronger, but I'm also furious. So full of rage I can barely contain it. Power amplifies what is already within you, Vera said carefully. If you carry the deep wound of betrayal and the fire of rage, awakening your abilities will make them 1,000 times stronger. What if I can't control it? Sarah's voice broke. What if I become something worse than him? A monster that rules by fear. The question hung between them, heavy and sharp. Vera was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah with an intensity that seemed to peel back every layer of her soul. Do you know what your grandmother's greatest strength was? She asked finally. Her power, Sarah answered without hesitation. Her mercy, Vera corrected softly. She rose and stood beside Sarah at the window. Lyra had the power to break the world, yet she chose to build. She constantly questioned her own motives, worried she was becoming the very tyrants she fought against. It was that doubt, child, that constant self-examination, that kept her wolf from consuming her humanity. She placed a weathered hand on Sarah's shoulder. The fact that you are afraid of becoming a monster is the best evidence I have that you will not. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all. Her family's legacy, her people's history, her own desperate burning need to prove that she was worth more than they had told her. If I do this, she said slowly, and if I survive both the awakening and the fight, what happens then? Do I just go back to the mountains? Vera laughed, a sound like silver bells in a winter storm. Child, if you survive tomorrow night as a fully awakened moon-touched wolf, there is no going back. Every alpha in the 9 dominions will either want to serve you or destroy you. Every rejected wolf will see you as either their savior or a false hope. You will never be invisible again. You're not exactly selling this, Sarah said with a wry, trembling smile. I am being honest about the cost. The oracle's expression grew serious. Power always has a price. The question is whether you are willing to pay it to save your own life, and in doing so perhaps change the world. Sarah thought of Lyra's betrayal, of Rhys's terrified cruelty, of Celeste's quiet heartbreak. She thought of the wolves in the Great Hall, ready to watch her die for their entertainment, to let the status quo continue, built on the broken spirits of wolves like her. One more thing, she said. The ritual, what are the real odds? Vera was quiet for so long Sarah thought she wouldn't answer. For a wolf of your pure bloodline, with the catalyst of a powerful shattered bond to drive you, your odds improve from 1 in 1,000 to perhaps 1 in 10. Sarah's stomach plummeted. A 90% chance of a horrific death before she even set foot in the arena. Yes, Vera said as if reading her mind. But you have a 100% chance of death if you face him as you are now. The math was brutal, but it was clear. Die almost certainly trying to become a queen, or die absolutely certainly as a pawn. She turned from the window and met Vera's ancient gaze. What do I need to do? The oracle's smile was both proud and terrified. Are you certain? Once we begin, there is no turning back. I'm certain. Then we begin now. Remove your clothes. The ritual requires direct contact between your skin and the moonlight. As Sarah undressed, Vera began pulling items from a leather bag. Crystalline vials of glowing liquid, a knife carved from a single piece of obsidian that seemed to drink the light, and a single pure white feather from a beast Sarah couldn't name. It's time, Vera said, raising the obsidian knife. Are you ready to discover who you truly are? Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the beam of moonlight flooding the center of the room. I'm ready. The first cut drew blood that shimmered like liquid starlight, and the ancient words Vera spoke seemed to make the very stones vibrate with power. The breaking had begun. Chapter 8. Truth Revealed. The first stage felt like being set on fire from the inside out. A scream tore from Sarah's throat as Vera's obsidian blade traced glowing silver symbols across her skin. Each cut didn't feel like it was breaking her skin, but shattering something deeper, something sealed within her soul. The binding spells broke like chains of glass, and with each break, memories flooded her mind with searing clarity. A woman with hair like spun moonlight, her grandmother, lifting her to the sky. You are a daughter of the moon, little one. Never forget the power that flows in your veins. Fire. The scent of burning pine and shifter flesh. Her grandmother, a massive wolf of pure white light, fighting a dozen dark-furred alphas at once. Run, Sarah. Run and hide until the moon calls you home. Lyra, finding her 3 days later, a terrified, whimpering pup in a hollow log. I'll keep you safe, child. But we must never speak of the wolf you were born to be. The memories crashed over her, 20 years of suppressed identity returning in a tidal wave that left her gasping. She remembered her real name, her true heritage, the lullabies her grandmother had sung in the old tongue, songs of power, responsibility, and the terrible, beautiful weight of being a queen. Stage 1 is complete. Vera's voice sounded distant as if from another world. Your bindings are broken. Can you hear me, child? Sarah tried to answer, but her voice emerged as a low, guttural growl. The pain was indescribable, but beneath it, a new sensation was building. Power. Raw, ancient, and terrifyingly vast, making her very skin feel too small to contain it. Stage 2 begins now, Vera warned. Do not fight what is coming. The transformation started in her bones. Sarah had shifted hundreds of times, and it had always been as natural as breathing. This was nothing like that. This felt like her skeleton was being forcefully remade, her DNA being rewritten by moonlight and magic. Her wolf form, when it finally burst forth, was nothing like the small, silver creature she'd always been. She was massive, easily twice the size of any normal wolf, with a coat that shimmered like liquid moonlight and eyes that blazed with ethereal silver fire. When she opened her jaws to howl, the sound didn't echo off the stone walls. It made them tremble. But it was the third stage that nearly destroyed her. As her human consciousness merged with her awakened abilities, her mind expanded beyond the confines of her own skull. Suddenly she could feel everything. Every wolf within the mountain fortress. Their locations, their emotions, their pack bonds. She could feel the pull of their feral souls, the instinctive recognition of her superior bloodline that made them want to submit, even from a distance. She could also feel their fear. And their plots. Her expanded senses picked up on a hushed, urgent conversation happening deep within the High Alpha's private chambers. Kalen was not a neutral arbiter. He was meeting with the alphas of the Sunstone and Blackrock packs, Arya's father included. Cannot allow a moon touch to survive, Alpha Sunstone was saying, his words carrying clearly to her new senses. If she defeats Ironclaw, she'll have a legal claim to his territory. If she dies, she becomes a martyr for the rogues. Either outcome destabilizes our power. The she-wolf must die. Agreed, the Blackrock Alpha grunted. But it must look like a tragedy. An accident during the challenge, perhaps. High Alpha Kalen's ancient voice was thoughtful, laced with cunning. And if Ironclaw fails to kill her and she somehow proves more resilient than expected? Then we activate the contingency, Alpha Sunstone said grimly. Silver-tipped crossbow bolts from the spectator stands. We blame it on rogue hunters who infiltrated the crowd. The territories mourn a tragic attack, and the lunar bloodline dies with her for good. Sarah's consciousness reeled. The challenge was a sham. A rigged game where every outcome led to her death. They fear us because they know what we could become, her newly awakened wolf snarled in her mind. They remember our grandmother and they will not risk history repeating itself. But there was something else in the fortress's psychic currents, something that made her hackles rise. Rhys. She focused on him, using abilities she was still learning to comprehend. He was in his chambers, but he wasn't alone. The blood shaman Victor was with him. Enhancement is complete. Victor's voice rasped like grinding stone. The alpha's strength has been tripled. His healing is accelerated. The rage tonic is active. The girl will not survive the first minute of combat. And then she felt Rhys. He was pacing his chamber like a caged beast. The rage tonic had turned his feral bond from a smoldering fire into an agonizing, all-consuming inferno. His wolf wanted to kill, to dominate, to conquer. But it also wanted to claim. He was fighting a war within himself, torn between the tonic's command to destroy her and the bond's primal, desperate need to possess her. It was a maddening, aggressive lust that was driving him to the brink of insanity. Vera, Sarah's voice cut through the expanding chaos in her mind. Focus on my voice. You are losing yourself to the power. Come back to me. With a monumental effort, Sarah dragged her consciousness back to the small stone room. Vera was kneeling beside her, her face pale with concern. Sarah realized she had been lying on the floor, unconscious, while her awakened senses ran wild. I'm back, she managed, her voice now carrying a strange harmonic resonance that made the air vibrate. What did you see? Vera asked urgently. Sarah quickly explained it all. The High Alpha's conspiracy, the planned assassination, Rhys's chemically induced rage. Vera's expression grew darker with each revelation. I feared as much, the oracle said when Sarah finished. The political implications of your survival are too great for them to leave to chance. So what do I do? Sarah asked, her new power thrumming beneath her skin. I can't run. And I can't fight all of them even with this. Vera was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes calculating. There is one option, she said finally. But it is a risk beyond measure. It will change everything. Tell me. We do not wait for tomorrow night's challenge. Vera's smile was as sharp and cold as winter moonlight. We act tonight. While they still believe you are a frightened little Omega locked in this tower. A dangerous light entered her eyes. It is time to remind the 9 Dominions why the lunar bloodline was feared enough to warrant genocide. Sarah felt her wolf purr with savage anticipation. What did you have in mind? Revolution, child. Vera stood, power radiating from her ancient frame. Swift, decisive, and absolutely terrifying. It is time to show them what happens when they corner a wolf with nothing left to lose. Chapter 9. Final Confrontation. There was no warning. One moment the reinforced ironwood door of the exile's tower stood solid. The next, it was ripped from its stone hinges and thrown down the corridor as if it were a twig. Sarah strode through the opening, no longer the trembling girl who had entered but something new. Something terrible and beautiful. Power radiated from her in visible waves, the very air shimmering around her. The two royal guards stationed outside didn't even have time to draw their blades. The moment their eyes met hers, their own wolves seized control. They collapsed to their knees, whining, baring their throats in instinctive, absolute submission. She was an alpha of a kind they had never known, a power their feral souls recognized and bowed to without question. She walked through the stone corridors, a queen moving through her castle. Every wolf she passed had the same reaction: shock followed by an immediate, involuntary submission. Their alphas might rule their packs, but her bloodline ruled their very souls. With Vera a silent, approving shadow at her side, she strode not towards the training yards or the exit, but towards the alpha's wing of the fortress. Towards Rhys. He felt her coming. His chemically enhanced senses, already hyper-aware and screaming with aggression, picked up her scent, her power 100 yards away. The rage tonic howled for him to meet this threat, to destroy it. But the feral bond screamed her name, a desperate possessive litany of mine, mine, mine. He was a caged beast tearing at his own bars, caught between the urge to kill and the need to claim. Sarah didn't knock. She raised a hand and the massive rune-carved door to his private chambers exploded inward, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Rhys was there, standing in the center of the room, half-shifted. Claws extended, his eyes glowing with the unnatural, feverish red of the rage tonic. A low, murderous snarl was already rumbling in his chest. He was a perfect killing machine, primed and ready to destroy her. But the moment his red eyes met her glowing silver ones, the snarl died in his throat. He saw her. Not as the silver-pelted Omega he had scorned, but as the magnificent, terrifying creature she had become. The feral bond, already a raging inferno, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. It was no longer a fire he could fight. It was a tidal wave of pure, agonizing need that drowned the tonic's rage in an instant. The desire to kill was swept away by a much more powerful, much more devastating desire. The desire to possess, to own, to submit. His body betrayed him completely. A choked gasp escaped his lips. His powerful legs buckled and the great alpha Rhys Ironclaw, the wolf who had never bowed to anyone, crashed to his knees. He was trembling, gasping for air, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and soul-deep adoration. He was undone. Sarah walked slowly towards him, her bare feet silent on the cold stone. She stopped just out of his reach, looking down at the broken alpha with an expression of pity and immense power. "This is what you rejected," she projected directly into his shattered mind, her mental voice a clear melodic bell that cut through his chemically induced haze. "This is the power you feared. You were right to be afraid." Without another word, she turned her back on him, leaving him trembling and broken on the floor, his pride and his rage reduced to nothing but ash and need. Her destination was not yet reached. She swept from his chambers and strode, with purpose and terrifying calm, directly toward the great hall. She could feel them in there, the conspirators huddled together and plotting her demise. She didn't bother with the door. With a flick of her wrist, a wave of pure telekinetic force slammed into the massive portals, blasting them inward. She stepped over the splintered wood and into the hall, where High Alpha Kalen and the alphas of Sunstone and Blackrock stared at her, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated shock and terror. Her power washed over them, a cold, lunar tide that made their own alpha auras feel like flickering candles in a hurricane. "The right of challenge is a lie," she announced, her voice echoing with the power of her ancestors. The wolves in the hall fell to their knees not out of respect but out of an instinctive, primal fear. "You plan to murder me regardless of the outcome." Her glowing silver eyes met Kalen's. "I believe it's time we discussed a new arrangement." Chapter 10. Resolution. The Great Hall was a tableau of frozen terror. High Alpha Kalen, A wolf who had ruled for 2 centuries through fear and political maneuvering, was utterly silenced. The other 2 conspirator alphas, powerful leaders in their own right, were pale and trembling, their own inner wolves completely dominated by the sheer overwhelming presence of the creature before them. "You speak of lies, rogue," Alpha Sunstone managed to grit out, trying to muster some defiance, though his body remained bowed. "You have no proof." Sarah smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. "Proof." She closed her eyes for a moment. Her mental voice, now amplified by her awakened power, echoed not just in the hall, but in the mind of every single wolf within the fortress. High Alpha Kalen, meeting with Alphas Sunstone and Blackrock. Their plan: silver-tipped crossbows from the stands, disguised as an attack by rogue hunters, should I survive the challenge. A tragic accident to ensure the lunar bloodline stays buried. A collective gasp went through the hundreds of wolves now psychically linked to her. She had not just accused them, she had shown everyone their treachery. Enraged and exposed, Alpha Sunstone finally broke. With a roar he shifted, lunging at her, a massive golden-furred wolf bent on tearing her throat out. Sarah didn't move. She didn't even flinch. She simply met his eyes and pushed. Not with physical force, but with the full, undeniable weight of her alpha command. The charging wolf stopped dead in its tracks, skidding on the stone floor. It let out a terrified whimper, and then, against every instinct of his human mind, the great alpha's wolf form collapsed, rolling onto its back, exposing its soft belly in the ultimate gesture of submission. Sarah looked down at him with disdain. "Your power is built on fear," she said, her voice now quiet but carrying to every corner of the hall. "Mine is built on truth." At that moment, a figure appeared in the shattered doorway. It was Rhys. The red glow of the rage tonic was gone from his eyes, leaving them their natural storm gray, but they were filled with a raw, broken emotion Sarah had never seen. He was no longer the arrogant, proud alpha. He was just a wolf, staring at the mate his soul had chosen. He walked slowly into the hall, his eyes never leaving Sarah. He saw the powerful alphas groveling before her, saw the absolute command she wielded, and he understood. He walked past the submissive form of Alpha Sunstone, and without hesitation, in front of the High Alpha, the elders, and hundreds of his peers, he dropped to one knee. "The challenge is forfeit," Rhys said, his voice raw and thick with emotion, but carrying with absolute sincerity. "I submit to her. I was wrong. I was a fool, blinded by pride and fear." His head bowed. "I am unworthy of the bond, but I will not deny it again." This public, willing submission from the proudest alpha in the territories was more shocking than any battle. It was a surrender of the soul. Sarah now had it all. The conspirators were exposed, her rival alpha was on his knees. He could destroy them. She could take Kalen's throne, execute the traitors, and rule by the very fear they had tried to use against her. Her grandmother might have. The power humming in her veins certainly tempted her to. This was the ultimate test. She looked at the cowering alphas, then at the kneeling form of Rhys, and finally at the hundreds of wolves watching, waiting. And she made her choice. "Get up," she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its authority. She was speaking to all of them. "I do not want your throne. I do not want your fear." She turned to High Alpha Kalen, whose face was a mask of disbelief. "The law of the dominance forfeit is now absolute. It will be honored for all wolves from this day forward. Any alpha who breaks it will answer not just to the crown but to me." She then looked to Rhys. "I claim my right. Half your territory as is decreed by the pact." A murmur went through the crowd. She was not destroying the law, she was enforcing it. "But I will not rule it as a conqueror," she continued, her voice rising again. "My new dominion, carved from the Ironclaw lands, will be a sanctuary. A place for any wolf who has been cast aside. Rogues, omegas, the bond broken, the silver-pelted and the shadow-pelted. All will have a home, where worth is measured not by bloodline or power, but by loyalty and heart." It was a declaration of a new era. Rhys finally looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate, heartbreaking hope. "The bond. Is there any chance? Can it ever be healed?" She looked at the man who had tried to break her, the wolf her soul was irrevocably tied to. She saw the ruins of his pride and the first fragile shoots of a man who might one day be worthy. She could have crushed him completely. Instead, she offered him the one thing he had never offered her, a a sliver of grace. "The bond was never broken, Rhys," she said softly. "Only you were." She held his gaze. "Perhaps," she said, the word hanging in the air, filled with infinite painful possibility. "If you can become a wolf worthy of it." With that she turned her back on the great hall, on the cowering alphas and the broken man who was her mate. Vera fell into step beside her. She was not walking away as a victim but as a founder. A queen in her own right. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she felt not the weight of revenge, but the lightness of a future she would now build with her own 2 hands. Not bad for a rejected rogue. Chapter 11. The Borderlands. The lands Rhys had forfeited were harsh and beautiful, a stretch of rugged mountains, dense pine forests and hidden valleys known as the Shadowfell. For centuries the Ironclaw pack had used it as a buffer zone, a desolate territory to keep weaker packs at bay. Now it was Sarah's. An alpha dominion born from rejection. She arrived not with a war party, but with Commander Hayes and a small contingent of royal guards loyal to the High Alpha's decree, if not to the man himself. They helped her secure the old, abandoned Ironclaw fortress carved into the heart of the largest mountain, a place of cold stone and forgotten history. She named it Lunaris. Words spread like wildfire through the 9 dominions. The story of the silver wolf who had defied an alpha, claimed her right and founded a sanctuary. In the first week they came in trickles. A scarred old wolf with one eye, cast out from his pack for being too old to fight. A young she-wolf with 3 terrified pups, her mate killed and her position usurped. A pair of young males, brothers whose Omega bloodline made them perennial targets. The scarred, the broken, the mismatched. They were the first citizens of Lunaris. Sarah welcomed them all. There were no bloodline hierarchies here, no ranks of Beta or Omega. There was only the pack and she was its heart. She worked harder than any of them, hauling stones to reinforce the fortress walls, hunting alongside the weakest members, personally tending to the wounded. She was not a distant, fearsome alpha. She was their shield. Her second-in-command emerged naturally. Jax, the one-eyed rogue, had seen 100 winters and forgotten more about survival than most alphas ever learned. He was cynical, grizzled, and utterly loyal to the she-wolf who had looked at his scars and seen experience, not weakness. "They're watching us," he grunted one evening as they stood on the battlements, looking out over the valley where new tents and campfires dotted the landscape. Her pack was growing, nearly 100 strong already. "Kaelin, Sunstone, they're not going to let this stand. They see a sanctuary for outcasts. They see an army of wolves with nothing to lose." "Let them watch," Sarah replied, though a chill went down her spine. "We are simply trying to live." "To them your existence is an act of war," Jax said grimly. That night, alone in her Spartan chambers, the weight of leadership pressed down on her. The raw, immense power of her bloodline was a constant thrum beneath her skin. It was easy to command, to make the earth tremble, to feel the very thoughts of her pack. The hard part was the restraint. The hard part was choosing to be a leader instead of a tyrant. As she lay on her cot of furs, staring out at the brilliant full moon, a scent hit her, so vivid it was as if he were standing in the room. Pine, storm and iron. Rhys. The feral bond, stretched thin across the miles, pulsed with a sudden, agonizing ache. It was a phantom touch against her skin, a whisper in her soul. Her body reacted instantly, a wave of heat washing through her, her very core clenching with a need that was both infuriating and undeniable. Her wolf, which had been content, stirred and whined his name. She squeezed her eyes shut, her fists clenching the furs. She had his land, she had her pack, she had her freedom. But she was not free. A part of her was, and always would be, tied to the very wolf who had tried to destroy her. And she knew with a certainty that terrified her that he felt it too. Chapter 12. The Hunger. For Rhys Ironclaw, life had become a special kind of hell. The rage tonic had been purged from his system, but the aftermath was brutal. He was left with the raw, unfiltered power of the feral bond, now amplified 1,000-fold by Sarah's awakening. It was a constant, agonizing presence. He felt her. Not just in his mind but in his blood, in the very marrow of his bones. He smelled her scent, moonflower and wild mint, on the wind even though she was 100 miles away. He woke from dreams of her, his body slick with sweat, his sheets tangled, the ache in his loins a physical torment. The bond was no longer a connection. It was a clawed fist wrapped around his soul, squeezing. His pack felt the change. Their alpha, once a figure of pure, terrifying dominance, was now distracted, restless. His temper, once a predictable storm, was now erratic. He would lash out one moment, then retreat into a brooding silence the next. He was a leader at war with himself. One afternoon, Gideon, his beta, found him in the training yard, relentlessly attacking a practice dummy, his movements savage, his breathing ragged. "Alpha," Gideon said cautiously. "You will exhaust yourself." Rhys spun, his eyes blazing with a feral light. "What would you have me do, Gideon?" "Meditate," he snarled. "I would have you lead," his beta replied, unflinching. "Your mind is in the Shadowfell with her. Your pack is here." Gideon's words hit him harder than any physical blow. He was right. He had spent his life cultivating an image of perfect control, of unassailable strength. Now he was being consumed by a hunger so profound it was eroding the foundations of his rule. He looked around his dominion at the wolves who looked to him with a mixture of fear and respect, and saw things he had been blind to before. He saw the harshness of his own laws, the fear in the eyes of his omegas, the silent struggles he had always deemed unimportant. He had called Sarah weak, but her sanctuary was built on a foundation of compassion he had never understood. That evening he made a decision. He could not undo the past. He could not erase his cruelty or his pride. But he could become the alpha she had accused him of not being. He started small. He visited the lower dens, spoke with the omegas, and adjusted the hunting distributions to ensure the weakest were fed first. He personally oversaw the training of the younger wolves, tempering his harshness with patience. But it wasn't enough. The bond was a gaping wound, and the only balm was her. "Gideon," he said late one night, staring at a map of the territories. The line dividing his lands from hers was a fresh scar of red ink. "Send a rider to Lunaris. Request a formal meeting with Alpha Nightbreeze. The topic: establishing official trade routes and border patrols." Gideon stared at him. "Alpha is that wise? She will see it as a provocation. She will see it as what it is," Rhys said, his voice rough. "An alpha acknowledging the power of another. It is the proper way. The lawful way." It was a lie, and they both knew it. The trade routes were a flimsy excuse. He needed to see her. He needed to breathe the same air as her. He needed to know if the wolf who had brought him to his knees could ever look at him with anything other than hatred. He had to face the fire that was consuming him, even if it meant being burned to ash. Chapter 13. Whispers of War. The arrival of Rhys's messenger threw Lunaris into a state of quiet turmoil. The request was formal, respectful, and perfectly logical. 2 neighboring dominions needed to establish borders. Yet Sarah felt the true meaning of it coil in her gut like a serpent. It wasn't about politics. It was about the bond. "It's a trap," Jax grunted, his one good eye narrowed with suspicion as they discussed it in her council chamber. "He wants to see the lay of your land, measure your strength, find your weaknesses." "Perhaps," Sarah mused, tracing the border on her own map. "Or perhaps he is doing exactly what he says, acting like a proper alpha." "A proper alpha doesn't publicly reject his mate and then ask for a trade meeting a month later," Jax countered. "Something is wrong here." Before she could decide how to respond, another visitor arrived, this one far more secretive. Arya Sunstone slipped into Lunaris under the cover of a new moon, her face pale with urgency. "They're plotting, Sarah," she said, forgoing all pleasantries. "My father, Kaelin, the Blackrock Alpha. They've been meeting in secret. They can't attack you directly. Your public support among the lower-ranking wolves is too strong, and Kaelin fears the power you displayed. So they've devised a more subtle plan." "What plan?" Sarah asked, her blood running cold. "They plan to starve you out," Arya revealed. "Your lands are harsh. You rely on the game migrating from the south and trade for grain from the western settlements. My father has already used his influence to halt the grain shipments. And they've sent hunters to the southern plains to divert the caribou herds east, away from your territory. They plan to make your people so hungry and desperate that they either turn on you or abandon you." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They weren't just attacking her. They were attacking the pups, the elders, the very wolves she had sworn to protect. "There's more," Arya added, her voice dropping. "The whispers. They plan to make it look like the work of the Ironclaw pack. They want to drive a wedge between you and Rhys, to spark a war between the two of you that will weaken you both, leaving you vulnerable for them to pick apart. Sarah felt a wave of cold fury. This was the game of alphas she had always despised. A game played with the lives of innocent wolves. "Thank you, Arya," Sarah said, her voice tight. "You have taken a great risk coming here." "The old ways need to end," Arya said simply. "You are the only one with the power to end them." After Arya left, Sarah stood on the battlements, the cold night wind whipping her silver hair. The request for a meeting from Rhys now seemed entirely different. Was it part of the plot? A way for him to assess her desperation? Or was it something else? The feral bond pulsed, a low, constant hum in her soul. It offered no answers, only a persistent aching pull toward him. Her mind was a whirlwind of suspicion and strategy, but her body, her very wolf, betrayed her. Wanted him. Wanted to believe him. "Jax," she called to her beta who stood a few paces away. "Send a rider back to the Ironclaw Dominion. Tell Alpha Rhys I will grant him his meeting. Here. In 3 days' time." "Sarah, are you sure?" "No," she admitted, her gaze fixed on the dark line of the mountains that marked his territory. "I'm not. But I need to look him in the eye and see for myself if he is a conspirator, or if he is the other half of my soul." Chapter 14. The Unspoken Meeting. The air in Lunaris was thick with tension on the day of Rhys's arrival. Sarah's wolves lined the path to the fortress, their expressions a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. They were outcasts, and the wolf who approached was the epitome of the system that had rejected them. Rhys came as he'd promised. Not with a war party but with only Gideon at his side. He was dressed not in armor but in simple black leather, yet he still radiated an aura of immense power. As he walked through the gates, his storm-gray eyes scanned the fortress, the wolves, the land before finally settling on her. Sarah stood at the entrance to her great hall, flanked by Jax. The moment their eyes met, the world seemed to fall away. The feral bond, which had been a constant aching hum, roared to life. It was a physical force, a wave of heat and energy that slammed into them both. Sarah's breath caught in her throat and she saw Rhys visibly flinch, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. The space between them was a live wire, crackling with a year's worth of unspoken need, rage, and a desire so potent it was suffocating. "Alpha Seraphina," he said, his voice a low, rough baritone. The formal title was like a shield. "Alpha Rhys," she replied, her own voice betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. "Welcome to Lunaris." She led them to her council chamber. It was nothing like the grand halls of the other dominions. It was a simple rustic room with a massive oak table and furs thrown over stone benches. The only adornment was a large, detailed map of the surrounding territories. The meeting began with strained formality. They spoke of border markers, hunting grounds, and patrol schedules. Gideon and Jax did most of the talking, their voices filling the tense silence as their alphas watched each other, locked in a silent battle. Every nerve ending in Sarah's body was screaming his name. His scent filled the room, a heady mix of pine and storm that was both a torment and a homecoming. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the corded muscles in his forearms as he rested his hands on the table. He looked leaner, harder, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there a month ago. He looked like a man in agony. Rhys was fighting his own war. Being this close to her was exquisite torture. The rage tonic had been a blunt instrument of fury. This was a far more refined pain. He wanted to cross the table, haul her into his arms and bury his face in her silver hair. He wanted to beg her forgiveness. He wanted to roar his claim for all the world to hear. Instead he forced himself to talk about lumber rights. "We need to clarify the eastern ridge," he said, his voice strained, pushing a finger towards the map. "By patrols have reported." He trailed off as Sarah leaned forward to look, her silver hair brushing against the back of his hand. The contact was electric. A bolt of pure white-hot lightning shot up his arm and straight to his core. He jerked his hand back as if burned. Sarah gasped, a small, sharp sound, her own body jolting from the shock. For a heartbeat, all pretense vanished. Their eyes met and the raw, untamed power of the bond was laid bare. It was all there. The fury, the betrayal, the shame, and beneath it all, a savage, soul-deep hunger that defied all logic and reason. In his eyes she saw not a tyrant but a wolf utterly lost. In her eyes he saw not a victim, but a queen who held his very soul in her hands. Gideon cleared his throat loudly, breaking the spell. The air was thick with what had almost happened. Rhys stood abruptly. "The terms are acceptable," he said, his voice hoarse. "We will draw up the treaty." He turned and strode from the room without another word, unable to endure another moment in her presence without losing what little control he had left. Sarah remained at the table, her hand trembling where he had touched her. She had gotten her answer. That jolt, that raw, unguarded agony in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a conspirator. It was the look of a man being torn in two. But as she watched him disappear, a cold dread settled over her. If Rhys wasn't behind the plot to starve her pack, then he was a target just as she was. And the old alphas would not stop until they were both destroyed. Chapter 15. The First Move. The attack came 2 nights later, under the sliver of a new moon. It was swift, brutal, and calculated. A patrol of Sarah's wolves guarding the southern pass, the very route the caribou herds were supposed to take, was ambushed. 4 of her pack were left dead, their bodies savaged not just by claw and tooth, but by weapons coated in silver. A clear message. Jax was the one who found them, his single eye blazing with a cold fury Sarah had never seen. "It was the Ironclaw pack," he snarled, dropping a blood-soaked leather bracer onto the council table. Stamped into it was the unmistakable sigil of Rhys's personal guard. They were trying to secure the pass to ensure the herds stay diverted. My scouts saw them retreating back towards Ironclaw territory. The council chamber fell silent. Sarah stared at the bracer, the evidence damning and undeniable. Every rational part of her mind screamed that she had been a fool. The meeting had been a feint, a tactic to lull her into a false sense of security while his warriors prepared to strike. He had played her perfectly. The memory of his touch, of that shared moment of raw connection, now felt like the ultimate betrayal. Her heart, which had dared to feel a flicker of something other than rage, iced over. "He wants a war," one of her captains growled. "He wants to take back his land." "We give it to him," another roared. "We meet them on the border and show them the strength of Lunaris." Sarah listened, her face a mask of stone. Her wolf was howling for blood, for vengeance against the mate who had scorned her, betrayed her, and now attacked her people. It would be so easy to give in, to unleash the full, terrifying power of her bloodline and march on the Ironclaw dominion. It was what they all expected. It was what her grandmother would have done. But Celeste's journal and Aria's warning echoed in her mind. "He's afraid of losing control. They want to spark a war between you both." This felt too perfect, too clean. Rhys was many things. Proud, arrogant, cruel, but was he this sloppy? Would he really leave behind such an obvious piece of evidence? Her mind warred with her heart, her instincts with her pain. Meanwhile, in the Ironclaw fortress, Rhys was woken by Gideon crashing into his chambers. "Alpha. A patrol from Lunaris has been slaughtered at the southern pass." Rhys was on his feet in an instant. "By whom?" "The evidence points to us," Gideon said grimly. "One of your guard's bracers was found at the scene. Born from the third claw. He reported it missing yesterday. Claimed it was stolen from his barracks." Rhys's blood ran cold. "Stolen. Frame. A perfect, undeniable frame. Sunstone. Killing." They had made their move. They had murdered her people and signed his name to the deed. Sarah would see this as the ultimate betrayal. She would see his meeting as a lie, and she would come for him with all the righteous fury of a queen and a scorned mate. She would bring war. And his pack, his people, would pay the price for a crime they didn't commit. He could fortify his borders. He could prepare for her inevitable assault. He could meet her power with his own and let the territories drown in their blood, just as the old alphas wanted. Or he could do the one thing his pride had never allowed. He could trust her. He could surrender. "Gideon," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Ready my horse. No armor. No war party. No guards." "Alpha, what are you doing?" his beta asked, his face pale with alarm. "You can't ride into her territory alone. They will tear you apart." "They might," Rhys acknowledged, pulling on a simple tunic. He strapped his ceremonial blade to his back, a sign of his alpha status, but useless against a pack. But it is the only way. He had tried to prove he was worthy with quiet actions in his own territory. Now he had to prove it with an act of absolute faith, an act that could very well be his last. As dawn broke, casting long shadows from the peaks of the Shadowfell, the lookouts on the walls of Lunaris sounded the alarm. A single rider was approaching fast and hard. Sera stood on the battlements, her heart hammering against her ribs, expecting to see an army. Glad she saw him. Alpha Rhys Ironclaw, riding alone with no weapon in his hand and no guards at his back. He rode straight towards her gates, into the heart of a pack that was baying for his blood. He was not coming as a conqueror. He was not coming to declare war. He had come to stand with her. Chapter 16. The Surrender. Rhys reined in his horse 100 paces from the gates of Lunaris. He could feel the eyes of dozens of wolves on him, could smell their hostility on the wind. He dismounted, leaving the reins to hang loose, a sign he did not intend a swift escape. He stood alone in the valley, vulnerable, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the figure standing atop the fortress walls. Sera. Inside Lunaris, the rage was a living thing. "It's a trick," a captain snarled. "He comes alone to feign innocence while his warriors circle in the mountains. Let us take him," another growled, his wolf straining against his skin. "An alpha for 4 of our own. A fair trade." Sera listened, her heart a frantic drum. Her wolf screamed for vengeance, for the justice of Claw and Fong. The bracer was undeniable proof. But her eyes were locked on the lone figure below. This was not the act of a cunning conspirator. This was the act of a desperate man. This was suicide. Or was faith. "Open the gates," she commanded, her voice cutting through the angry murmurs. "Alpha, you can't." Jax protested, stepping in front of her. "It's too great a risk." "The greater risk is becoming the monsters they want us to be," she replied, her silver eyes blazing with an authority that silenced all argument. "Let him in." The massive gates of Lunaris groaned open. Rhys took a deep breath and walked forward, entering the den of the wolves who believed he had murdered their own. They lined his path, a gauntlet of bared teeth and low growls, but none dared to touch him without their alpha's command. He walked with his head held high, his gaze never leaving Sera as she descended the stone steps to meet him in the courtyard. They stood face to face, the air crackling with tension. The feral bond was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions: grief, fury, suspicion, and a devastating, soul-deep current of connection. "You have courage, I'll give you that," Sera said, her voice dangerously quiet. "To come here after what you did." "I did not do it," Rhys said, his voice rough but steady. He didn't try to explain, didn't offer excuses. He simply stated his truth. He unstrapped his ceremonial alpha blade and held it out to her, hilt first. "This is a blood feud now. They murdered your pack and signed my name to the deed. They want us to destroy each other. I will not give them that satisfaction." He pressed the hilt of his blade into her hand. "My life is yours. Kill me now and my pack will see it as justice for a crime they believe I committed. Your pack will have their vengeance and the old alphas will have one. Or," he met her gaze, his storm-gray eyes raw and stripped of all pride, "you can trust me. And together we can make them pay for what they have done to us both." It was the ultimate surrender. He was placing his life, his honor, and the fate of his pack entirely in her hands. He was giving her the control he had spent his entire life refusing to relinquish. Sera stared at the blade in her hand, the symbol of his alpha power, of his very life. Her wolf screamed for blood. Her heart screamed with a pain so profound it was a physical ache. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, stark and terrifying. He was innocent. And he was willing to die to prove it. Slowly, deliberately she turned the blade and offered it back to him, hilt first. "A war is coming, Rhys Ironclaw," she said, her voice ringing with the power of a queen. "But you will not face it as my prisoner or my enemy. You will face it as my ally." A collective gasp went through the courtyard. An alliance. Not just a truce but a formal joining of forces between the rejected and their rejector. It was unthinkable. It was revolutionary. It was their only hope. Chapter 17. The Alliance. The alliance between Lunaris and the Ironclaw Dominion sent shockwaves through the shifter world. It was a move no one had anticipated. Kaelin and the conspirators had expected a bloody border war, a conflict that would bleed both packs dry. Instead they were faced with a unified front, two powerful dominions joined by the very bond the old alphas had tried to use as a weapon. The first days of the alliance were fraught with tension. Rhys's warriors, proud and disciplined, marched into Lunaris, their suspicion of the rogues barely concealed. Sera's pack, a motley crew of outcasts, eyed the Ironclaw wolves with deep-seated resentment. It was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The spark came in the training yard. A hulking Ironclaw captain made a derogatory comment about a one-eared Omega from Lunaris. Jax, ever the protector, stepped in. In seconds, the yard was a maelstrom of snarling wolves, all old wounds and simmering hatred boiling to the surface. Before it could erupt into bloodshed, two figures moved as one. Sera and Rhys entered the fray not with roars, but with a presence that was absolute. Enough. The dual alpha command, amplified by the feral bond, slammed into the wolves with physical force, bringing them all to their knees. "There is no Ironclaw here," Rhys snarled, his eyes blazing as he looked upon his own men. "There is no Lunaris. There's only the pack. Barpack. And we have one enemy. If you want to fight, save it for them. Anyone who raises a claw against a brother or sister in this alliance," Sera added, her voice a cold, silver whip, "will answer to me. Personally." The message was clear. The old divisions were dead. From that moment on, a fragile, grudging respect began to grow. They trained together, ate together, patrolled the borders together. The Ironclaw wolves were shocked by the fierce, unconventional fighting styles of the former rogues. Sera's pack was stunned by the disciplined tactics and unwavering loyalty of Rhys's warriors. They were two halves of a whole, and together they were formidable. The bond between Sera and Rhys deepened in the crucible of this shared purpose. They spent their days planning strategy, their nights poring over maps. They were a perfect team, his tactical brilliance complementing her intuitive, empathetic leadership. The professional respect slowly, inevitably bled into something more. The proximity was a sweet, relentless torture. They would brush hands over a map, and a jolt of pure electricity would arc between them, leaving them both breathless. He would catch her scent on the wind and have to physically restrain himself from going to her. She would hear his voice in a crowded room and her body would respond with an immediate, primal pull. The hunger was no longer just a physical ache. It was an emotional one. He saw the queen she had become, fierce and compassionate, and he fell in love with her not just as his mate but as his leader. She saw the man he was fighting to be, honorable and protective, and she saw the glimmer of the wolf she had been bonded to, buried beneath years of pride and fear. The tension was a constant, simmering presence. They were alphas, mates, allies, and two people who had hurt each other more deeply than anyone else could. The wall between them remained, built of his rejection and her pain. But cracks were beginning to form. Chapter 18. The trap is sprung. Arya's next message came with the first snows of winter. "They're moving. Kaelin has called a great conclave at the Sunstone Fortress. All 9 dominions are commanded to attend. The official reason is to address the rogue crisis and the unlawful alliance. The real reason is to publicly condemn you both and declare you enemies of the pact. It's a trap, Sera. Once you are all gathered, they plan to spring it." Sera and Rhys stood over the map in her council chamber. The Sunstone Fortress was deep in their enemy's territory, a veritable lion's den. "To refuse the High Alpha's summons is an act of treason," Rhys said, his voice grim. "He will use it as an excuse to rally the other dominions against us. And to go is to walk into our own execution," Sera countered. "Not necessarily," Rhys said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time in months. He tapped the map. "They expect us to be on the defensive. They expect us to be afraid. They don't expect us to use their own trap against them." For the next week they planned. They used their combined forces to quietly lock down the territories, using the skills of Sera's rogue scouts and the discipline of Rhys's warriors. Arya acted as their eyes and ears inside the Sunstone Fortress, feeding them information. The day of the conclave arrived, cold and gray. Sera and Rhys rode at the head of a combined delegation, a powerful unified force that made the other alphas shift nervously. They entered the great hall of the Sunstone Fortress, a place even grander than Kaelin's, and took their seats. The air was thick with hostility. High Alpha Kaelin began the proceedings, his voice booming with false righteousness, condemning their alliance, accusing them of destabilizing the territories. As he spoke, Sera saw Sunstone's guards moving subtly into position, blocking the exits. "And therefore," Kaelin thundered, This council finds Alpha Seraphina and Alpha Rhys guilty of treason against the First Pact. Their punishment is death. At that signal, Sunstone's warriors drew their blades. But before they could move, another sound echoed through the hall. The hunting horn of the Ironclaw pack, followed by the wild, ululating howl of the Lunaris wolves. The great doors of the hall burst open, but it was not Sunstone guards who stood there. It was Jax and Gideon side by side, backed by 100 of the Alliance's fiercest warriors. At the same moment, other warriors emerged from hidden alcoves and tapestries around the hall. Arya had shown them all the secret passages. The hunters had become the hunted. "You have made a grave miscalculation, Kaelin," Sarah said, her voice ringing with power as she and Rhys stood. "You thought this was your trap. But you have all been gathered here today to answer for your crimes." She looked at the shocked faces of the neutral alphas from the other dominions. "You have been lied to. The rogues you fear were created by a system that cast them out. The war you were promised was a fabrication, designed to hide the crimes of these so-called leaders." She projected the memory of the conspiracy she had overheard into all their minds, followed by the evidence Arya had gathered of the plot to starve her people. The truth hit the assembled alphas like a physical blow. They looked from the conspirators to the unified force that now controlled the hall, and they understood. "This is our justice," Rhys growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. The battle for the Shifter territories had begun. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. The great hall of the Sunstone Fortress erupted into chaos. It was not a battle of armies but a swift, decisive coup. The conspirators, Kaelin, Sunstone and the Blackrock Alpha, were quickly subdued by the Alliance warriors, their own guards too stunned and outnumbered to mount an effective defense. The neutral alphas, seeing the truth and the shift in power, wisely stood down. But in the chaos, High Alpha Kaelin, ancient and cunning, made a final, desperate move. With a roar of fury, he shifted into his massive black-furred wolf form and charged, not at Sarah or Rhys but at Arya, the traitor in their midst. Rhys moved like a thunderbolt, intercepting Kaelin's charge, his own powerful form meeting the ancient alphas in a clash of sound and fury. But Kaelin was old and his power was immense. He threw Rhys aside, his claws raking across Rhys's flank, leaving deep, bleeding gashes. As Kaelin loomed over the downed Arya, ready to deliver the killing bite, a blur of silver light shot across the room. Sarah, in her magnificent moon-touched wolf form, slammed into him. She was not just a wolf, she was a force of nature. She fought with a grace and power that left everyone watching breathless. She was the moon brought to earth, a dance of silver claws and divine fury. She did not kill him. With a final, powerful move, she pinned him to the ground, her jaws clamped around his throat, holding him immobile. The message was clear. She could end him, but she was choosing not to. She was choosing mercy. The battle was over. The conspirators were captured, their plot exposed. In the aftermath, as medics tended to the wounded, Rhys limped toward Sarah, who had shifted back to her human form. He was bleeding freely from the gashes on his side, but his eyes were only for her. He stopped before her, in front of all the alphas of the 9 dominions. "You saved me," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "After everything, you saved me." "We are allies," she said softly, though her heart was hammering. "No," he said, shaking his head. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. The touch was electric, but this time it was not just hunger. It was reverence. "We are more than that. I was a fool. A proud, terrified fool. I rejected the greatest gift the first wolf ever gave me. I rejected my soul." His storm-gray eyes were filled with 1,000 years of regret. "I love you, Seraphina moon-touched. I love the Omega you were, and I love the queen you have become. I know I am not worthy. I know I have no right to ask. But I am asking anyway. Forgiveness. A chance. One chance to be the mate you deserve." The great hall was silent, every wolf watching, holding their breath. This was the final battle, the one that mattered most. Not of power but of the heart. Sarah looked at the wolf before her, at his pain, his sincerity, his love. The wall she had built around her heart, the wall of betrayal and pain, finally crumbled into dust. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was a clash of souls, a release of all the pent-up fury, desire and agonizing love they had both suppressed. It was the feral bond finally, completely, joyously acknowledged. It was fire and moonlight, a promise and a healing. It was the beginning of everything. Chapter 20. The Unexpected End. 1 year later, the shifter territories were transformed. With Kaelin and the other conspirators imprisoned for their crimes, the Alpha Council had been restructured. It was now led not by a single High Alpha, but by a dual dominion, an alliance of two mates who ruled with a balance of strength and compassion. Alpha Rhys and Alpha Sera. The sanctuary of Lunaris had flourished, becoming the heart of the new territories, a place where any wolf could find a home. The old hierarchies were dissolving, replaced by a system based on merit and loyalty. Sera and Rhys ruled side by side, their bond a tangible force that brought peace and stability to the land. Their love was a legend, a story told to pups in every den, a tale of pride, rejection, and a redemption so profound it had reshaped their world. The passion between them had not faded. It had deepened into an unshakable partnership that was both tender and fiercely carnal. They were mates in every sense of the word. It was on the first anniversary of the Great Conclave that the end came. Not an end of fire and war, but one of quiet, stunning revelation. They were in their private chambers in Lunaris, the windows open to the cool mountain air. Sera was reading from an ancient scroll Vera had recently unearthed, a text from the time of the first wolf. Rhys was beside her, his arm wrapped around her, his head resting against her shoulder. "Listen to this," Sera murmured, her finger tracing a line of faded runes. "It's a prophecy. When the moon-touched returns and joins with the iron soul, the first pact will be fulfilled. Not by claw but by blood. A new age will be born and the shifter curse shall be undone." Rhys chuckled softly. "Sounds like the lore keepers were fond of drama." Sera fell silent. A strange, thoughtful expression crossed her face. "Rhys," she said slowly. "The curse. They always said the feral bond was a blessing but also a curse. A fire so strong it often leads to madness and destruction. That's why your pride was so strong, why you feared it. It's a flaw in our very nature." He nodded. "It is the duality of our kind. The man and the beast forever at war." Sera stood and walked to the window, staring out at the moon. "What if it wasn't meant to be a war?" she whispered. She placed a hand over her still flat stomach, a secret, hopeful smile touching her lips. "The prophecy says by blood. Not by battle." At that moment, a wave of pure, golden energy washed through the room, emanating from Sera. It was warm, peaceful, and immensely powerful. Rhys gasped, feeling it resonate deep within his own soul. It was the power of the bond, but different. Purified. He looked at Sera and he saw it. The faint, ethereal glow around her was not just the power of the moon. It was the power of creation. The truth dawned on him, a revelation so profound it shook him to his core. The feral bond wasn't a curse. It was incomplete. For generations, shifters had focused on dominance, power, and purity of bloodline. They had cast out the weaker lines, the omegas, the misfits. But the prophecy hinted at something else. It took the unshakable dominance of an Ironclaw and the divine empathetic magic of a moon-touched, the two most opposed and powerful bloodlines, to create something new. Their child, the child now growing within her, would not be born with the cursed, fractured bond of their ancestors. Their child would be the first of a new kind of shifter. A wolf born whole with the man and beast in perfect harmony. Their love hadn't just saved the territories. It had healed the very soul of their species. The great, unexpected end was not an ending at all. It was the beginning of a new chapter for all of wolf kind, born from the glad acceptance of a savage alpha's rejection.